Hello, wonderful people. Welcome back to my channel, The Teacher's Best Friend. So, for today's episode, I am going to discuss with you about special education. And I invited two guests for this afternoon to discuss about modification and accommodation on special education. And these are teachers in the United States for several years already, and I will give them a chance to introduce themselves. One of our guests, it's his second time already. Dr. Del Rosario was a guest in one of the episodes on the secret of a successful and healthy lifestyle in the Philippines. So I will let our guests to introduce themselves to you. So let's start with the lady, Miss Timmons.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Giovanni Timmons. I have taught in the Philippines for 3 years. I moved here in the United States, going on 15 years now. I stopped working for 8 years to raise my two kids, and I have been back teaching for this is my seventh year, and it's been a great ride so far.
Thank you, Miss Timmons.
Thank
So let's
you.
move to Dr. Del Rosario.
Good evening, everyone. So thank you, Dr. Areno, for inviting us to be a part of your special project. And I'm Alan Del Rosario, and I came to the United States in 2005 as a teacher, and currently I'm a high school special education teacher. I taught for 15 years in the Philippines and almost 16 years here in the United States.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for that introduction and welcome to the Teacher's Best Friend channel, Dr. Del Rosario and Miss Timmons. So for tonight's topic, we're going to have a discussion and sharing with our viewers regarding special education, accommodations, and modifications. So first, let's focus on the definition. Sometimes teachers they get confused what is modification and what is accommodation. So maybe we can explain to them briefly. Dr. Del Rosario can probably share and define what is modification and Ms. Timmons the accommodations.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you. So when we talk of special education, IEP or 504 plan, we think of accommodations and modifications. Most often, people use them interchangeably, and I know they sound similar, but they mean different things. So when we talk of accommodations, this is an attempt to change or remove the obstacles and barriers to learning. And accommodations change how kids learn, not what they learn. It's focused on the how. And when we talk of accommodations, uh, we provide it because it is required by the IDEA or the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And without the accommodations, we believe, or it is really based on research, that students with disabilities won't be able to grasp the lesson or the curriculum or the standards. So we provide these accommodations in the belief that through these accommodations, they will be able to attain the learning objectives and the goals of learning. And there are actually different types of accommodations. It may be through presentation, response, setting, and even timing and scheduling. So again, to simplify it, accommodations change how kids learn. Focus on the how, not what they learn.
Thank you, Dr. Del Rosario, for that clear definition. Would you like to add on that, Ms. Timmons, on modifications?
I was going to add a little bit more on accommodation and then I will start the modification. Would that be okay, Dr. Arenya?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
I would like
definitely.
to add from with what Dr. Dell has said, the what of the learning in accommodation, the what remains intact. So, like he said, it's the how, what they learn, the expectations from them will be the same as everybody else. So it remains intact. And like he said, there are categories or types. So accommodations can be in presentation, in response, in setting, in timing, and scheduling. All of those will be chosen by the IEP team depending on the case of the child. And of course, we are the SPED teachers that work with the student, so we know the student really well. And as a team, we will decide which one will work for the student without changing the curriculum and without changing what needs to be learned, because we're talking about accommodations right now. So uh, for example, it could one can be working with a larger print size. You know, some kids may have really high prescription with their glasses, so they need it magnified. That does not change the what. They still expected to the learning outcome is the same. It's just how they will access the materials, how they will access the learning itself. So also it is important to note that there are two things to note in accommodation and modification. Dr. Dell actually mentioned one. They sometimes are used interchangeably. It is important to note there are um, an accommodation can easily become a modification. What I mean by that is that, for example, I want to give a concrete example so that our viewers will understand the use of calculator. Now, me and Dr. Dell, we work together at the high school. The use of calculator for high school students is an accommodation because they already have learned the basic skills in math. But if you give a calculator to a student, say a first grade student or a second grade student, just learning math or starting to learn math, then that will turn into a modification. So it is important to note the level of the student, the previously learned skills, so that our intended accommodation will stay as an accommodation and not turn into a modification. And then another thing is there are also instructional accommodations and assessment accommodations. Now, in instructional accommodations, we use them in the classroom. Now, they are helpful in the classroom, yes, and they are effective, but they may not be effective in assessment. For example, high stakes assessment, state assessment, standardized assessments. There are very strict procedures to maintain the validity of the test. And some of the accommodations that we use in the classroom cannot be used during an assessment because then it would affect the validity of the test, which is what the assessment is about. So that's for accommodation. For modification, should I start on modification, Dr. Arenio?
Yeah, modification.
Okay, so we go to modification. So here, there are now substantial changes in what a student is expected to learn and demonstrate. So it may be in the instructional level, it may be in the content, or it may be in the performance criteria. For example, we will take as an example our own classes. We teach reading. Our students are given their correct lexile. So say they are ninth grade students, but their lexile level are probably 2 years behind. So sometimes they are given the lexile level that will not frustrate them, that they can do independently, especially if the requirement is to read independently. So they have to be given a lower lexile level just so they can work on them and not get frustrated. There is no chance for them to get frustrated. So that is an accommodation when the instructional level is changed, when the content is changed, and the performance criteria is changed. So I'm going to have Dr. Dell add a little bit more on modification.
Yeah. So both of you clearly define what is accommodation and what is modification. So in a simple way of explaining it is when we accommodate a learner, especially the students with special need, is like there is a curriculum, and then we would like to give the student accommodation so he can or she can access the curriculum without changing the curriculum. So just like,
Yes,
for example, using a calculator or using maybe a transcript, like translating talk to text. So
yes,
those are
exactly.
accommodations. And modification is like you modify the materials so it fits the level of the learner, just like what Miss Timon said. If, like, for example, they are on the ninth grade, but their level is like maybe just fifth or sixth grade. So you need to modify the materials so it could fit with their level of ability.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So that's how we explain the difference between accommodation and modification. And sometimes I get confused too, but the way you explain it, it's very clear to our audience. So now, um, think of one student without telling the names. Like, for example, one student and the disability. What particular accommodation did you give to that student? So just think of one of your students and a particular disability that they have. You can tell what kind of the disability without mentioning a name. And what accommodation did you provide to that student in order for that student to be successful in the classroom? So let's start with Dr. Del Rosario.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize first that the accommodations and modifications are not chosen solely by the case manager or
Yes.
by the teacher. We have to work as a group with the IEP team members. So we have the general education teachers, we have the special education teachers, and of course we have the administrators and other people involved. It depends upon the disability. Sometimes we also involve providers of related services. So all of these examples of accommodations we mentioned earlier and modifications, they are not prescribed by one person. So it's a teamwork among the members of the IEB team. So for example, in the high school where Miss Timmons and I work, most of our students are SLDs or students with specific learning disabilities. And usually in the areas of reading, writing, and math. So with that example, how do we accommodate and how do we modify? For example, in the area of presentation, when they are, of course, our target always is they are in the regular classroom because we want to emphasize LRE or the least restrictive environment. So how can we help these students with specific learning disabilities when they are in the regular classroom? So we may request, for example, uh, the teacher presenting the lesson, giving instructions. It would be better, for example, to write the instruction on the board and at the same time reading it aloud. So that's one example. Uh, Through that, if the student has reading disability, when it is being read by the teacher to the student, one way or another, we are guiding the student to understand the instructions clearly and improving also or helping him or her improve reading comprehension skills. And then when probably presenting a particular lesson, present it in various ways, multimodal methods to present classroom material. Uh, it may be through videos, it may be through cooperative learning, it may be through individual work. So there are various ways of presenting a material to our students. So make use of multimodal methods in presenting a lesson. And another example, for example, in timing, we may provide extra time to process oral information and directions. And then we can also give them more time to complete particular task or assessment or assignments. And sometimes when we talk of accommodating them in the classroom, we may say, finish, let's say, a portion of it, or try to finish, let's say, 50% of the material. That's already a modification. The accommodation would be give them give them extra time to finish the test. If for the regular students, this test or this assignment is good for, let's say, a day or 55 minutes, probably because of the disability of the student, we may extend it to, let's say, uh, 2 meeting days or 3 if possible. And we may shorten it also as part of our modifications. Those are just examples to make them successful and attain the learning objectives.
Thank you, Dr. Del Rosario. So let's hear from Ms. Timons some examples on how you address your student in the classroom, like specific students with learning disability or with different kind of disability.
Yeah, I remember, I'd say about 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I had a student that I had to copy paste the material and then encode, print it in a bigger, using bigger font. And then I also made, it was just a teacher made cardboard type thing that I taped so that it doesn't wear out and I can use it to him every day. And I had to cover line by line and sit with the student because the too many words in one page, it if it doesn't work well with him. So I had to make it big, and then so there's probably, I'd say, instead of 3 paragraphs in a page, it would only be 1 paragraph, and the text is bigger. And then he had that line cardboard thing, which actually really helped. And another thing, which is very common, that we do in the classroom, is giving them, like what Dr. Dell said, uh, giving the instructions verbally, but also writing them down, so that it's both auditory and it's both visual. Some, like I said, would they be better off with just one mode? And also, like I said, working with fewer items, which is the perfect example on the big font. Um, Another one would be a visual presentation of a verbal material, or use of graphic organizers as well. It immensely helps, especially in writing. We see that a lot. Modifications, I see, one example would be in math. Instead of, let's say they are required to give their answers in the simplest forms, for our students, it's okay as long as they have the answer, even if it's not in simplest form. Now, it is a modification because the expectation change. The expectation is for them to be able to answer in simplest form, but theirs is not, and it will be okay. We work together with the teachers, and they allow the students with IEP to arrive not even the simplest form, but it is equivalent. So that's one modification I see a lot in math. And in English, we use this a lot too, as we work together with the Gen Ed, giving them uh, lesser choices. So narrowing down the choices instead of four in multiple choice type test to only two. So then that lowers their choices, and the expectation differs because then they have lesser choices compared to the others. So that is another example of modification that we use a lot in the classroom.
Thank
I
you for, yeah.
also do sentence starters because
Yes, yes, that is a good one.
concerns is writing really. Uh, Whenever we have IEP meetings and we review academic records and performance and grades of students, it's writing that is really the difficult concern. So good that Ms. Timmons also mentioned graphic organizers. And I think one thing important also or effective is sentence starters, because I know sometimes the students, they have the idea in their head, but they have difficulty putting the ideas in writing. So sometimes we do that. So we start giving them sentence starters.
Thank you very much for those examples. And I am excited to share too. Remember, I started as special education teacher also when I came in the Philippines in early 2000. So some of the accommodations or modifications that I usually give to my students, especially when the student has the hyperactivity disorder, like you give them preferential seating, like put them in front of you so that they can focus on the lesson without, you know, and limit the distractions as well, especially if there are so many things in front of them that could distract them. So those are for students with short term attention or those with ADHD. So we always give them preferential seating. And for those students that have visual impairment as well and hard of hearing, we give them, preferential seating. Or sometimes part of the accommodation is we use the speaker so that they can hear us well. So those are just some things that
Well,
we can do. So in other words, we can say like all students are capable of learning. There are students that they're just learning differently. And some we call them they learn quickly and some they take time. But the bottom line is, as teachers, we should know how to accommodate their needs and we should know how to modify their work so that we can support our students to be successful in accessing their curriculum or the instruction. And at the end of the day, our objective is for all the students to learn.
to
That's
learn,
why
yes.
special education teachers are really special teachers because we are the one that makes things possible for these students that have disabilities for them to be successful and learn together with their colleagues. So
Yes,
yeah, so I
exactly.
salute both of you, Miss Timons and Dr. Del Rosario, for your work with the students with disabilities and for understanding how they learn. So
Yeah, we are the very first people that believe that everyone can learn.
yes,
And really, as a final note on accommodation and modification, like what Dr. Dell said, we are a team, and well-chosen accommodation and modification should bridge the gap because our students are in the general education classroom. We know that there is a disparity between the skill levels. So the IEP with well-chosen accommodations and modifications by the team, by the stakeholders, bridges that gap between what the student can do and what is expected of them in the general education classroom. So, and that's what the IEP is for. And when we give out the IEPs to the teachers, I even highlight the accommodations and modification because that is really the meat of what the general ed teachers look at. And of course, they are at the meetings too. They give input to the IEP. Their inputs are in the IEP under the present levels. So everybody works together so that that gap is bridged and that the students are able to learn alongside their peers. So,
Thank
And
you for that,
also,
Ms.
but in connection with that, the keyword is collaboration. So
true.
again, it's not solely decided upon by one person, but by a group, a team, IEP team. And without collaboration with the other stakeholders, as you mentioned, and with the general education teachers, our efforts won't be successful and won't be.
True.
So without these accommodations and modifications, the students will not become successful in the general education setting.
Thank you so much for that. So I think we are giving good examples and definitions here, and I hope our teacher viewers, especially the special education teachers, are learning a lot from your experience as teachers in the United States, and I thank you for sharing that. So, after this, we're going to have a discussion on high school transition. And I know there are so many teachers, and even I know we have a previous teacher who is also following my channel, and she is in particular requested for a discussion on transition. So we will move to that topic in a while. Okay. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.